They say that every town has its secrets, but in Umans, a sleepy place nestled between green hills and rust-colored roads, secrets didn't slither. They marched in broad daylight, unnoticed. But there was one man in Umans who could feel the tremors beneath the surface. His name was Pastor Ayula. To outsiders, he seemed gentle, almost unassuming, with a calm voice that never rose above the rustle of leaves during evening mass. Yet everyone in Umans knew that if there was a true guardian against darkness, it was him. Pastor Ayula had preached in that tiny town for over 25 years. Not once had he missed a sermon, never once betrayed his calling. But the older folk whispered about his prayers, saying he warred with shadows when others merely wished for light. Some even claimed, only half joking, that Pastor Ayula's eyes could read a man's soul as easily as Scripture, seeing faults, fears, and the hidden stains that no confession could clean. On one particularly luminous Saturday morning, hope and anticipation hung in the air like pollen, floating gently on the sunlight. This was no ordinary day. All of Umans buzzed and fluttered with excitement. A day of great celebration had arrived. It was the wedding of Checker Obi, the cherished son of Chief and Madam Obabi, to a woman named Adiz. Adiz was the sort of woman whose beauty turned heads even at a funeral. That morning, she would belong to the town's most eligible bachelor. Invitations had been whispered among neighbors for weeks. The tailors had worked overtime. The local market ran out of white roses and sparkling ribbons before the sun rose the day before. Pastor Ayula stood in his small, book-filled office, separated from the church hall by an aging pane of frosted glass. He watched as rays of morning sun fell across rows of polished wooden pews and meticulously arranged flower bouquets. He could hear the soft murmurs of the choir, warming their voices in gospel, stitching their nerves into harmony. Outside, a crowd had started to gather, even before the bells chimed. Wedding days like this one in Umans seemed to promise a pause in life's quiet struggles, as if God Himself might attend. But inside the pastor's chest, something heavy began to settle, a tension he could neither name nor shake. It was as if a single stone had been placed on his heart, cold and immovable. He felt it pressing deeper with each breath, even as he adjusted his spotless white robe and swept his eyes once more over every last detail of the sanctuary. As Pastor Ayula ensured every petal aligned and every runner unwrinkled, his gaze drifted back to the shadows, lingering just beyond the sunlight. Adiz, the beautiful bride, had left a peculiar impression on him. During their premarital counseling sessions, she had been the model of hospitality, soft-spoken and respectful. Yet after she departed each time, an odd hush would haunt the room, a lingering chill, as though invisible fingers pressed on the air long after her smile had faded. Her fiancé, Checker, radiated nothing but earnestness. He would fill silence with laughter and declarations of love, always with a kind of youthful fire. Adiz, meanwhile, stuck to nods and gentle smiles. She was hard to read, not in a secretive way, but in the way that glass is hard to pour emotion into. Then, during the wedding rehearsal, something else surfaced, the hold of her hand in checkers. Too tight. Not with nerves, but with a grip that hinted at possession, not affection. As these memories weighed down his thoughts, Brother MBA, vigilant as ever in his crisp security vest, passed by and paused. "Daddy, are you all right?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. Pastor Ayula shrugged off the feeling, giving a faint smile. Yes, just thinking." But the truth was, he wasn't able to stop thinking about Adiz. There was more than the usual anxiety here. There was a disturbance in the atmosphere, a vibration in the spirit. As Adiz's immaculate vehicle pulled up and the town's excitement rippled through the air, the pressure in Ayula's chest intensified. Inside, music swelled. The organist's fingers danced over polished keys as the choir soared. Photographers jostled, and the perfume of fresh flowers mixed with perfume of anticipation. Then, as the great wooden doors creaked open and all eyes turned, Adiz stepped into the light. She looked as though her dress had been spun out of moonlight, a soft, silken gown hugging her form, shimmering in the glow of chandeliers and camera flashes. Her hair, sculpted high and laced with silver clips, seemed almost regal. Her lips were painted with the boldest red. Her eyes glittered with something unreadable. To the crowd, she appeared perfect, a living portrait of joy and innocence. But Pastor Ayula knew better. Her smile, he saw, was shaped like glass, breathtaking, flawless, yet utterly unyielding. As Adiz took her first step down the aisle, a cold shiver sliced through the warmth of the sanctuary. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the air itself seemed to contract. The choir missed a note. Several guests exchanged anxious looks. Ayula felt the small weight in his chest mutate into a suffocating shadow. He inhaled deeply, gripping the Bible with white knuckles. Was this nerves, or was the Spirit stirring him to act? He could not be certain, only that he dare not dismiss what he felt. At the altar, Checker's face was aglow, lost in the radiance of his soon-to-be wife. His friends jostled, eager to witness the coupling of two beloved families. Bridesmaids trailed behind, softening Adiz's stride with the flutter of her veil. Some of the congregation wept, others filmed feverishly, enraptured by a love story they hoped would redeem their year. But Ayula was fixed, eyes trained not on Checker, but on Adiz. He watched her lips, her fixed smile already slipping. It was faint at first, the flickering of movement, not in song nor silent prayer, but in a whisper too private to share. Her lips were uttering words that didn't fit the moment or the hymns. The pastor's breath caught. What was it she was speaking? Desperate to connect, he lowered his eyes, whispering, "Jesus," under his breath. Adiz's lips continued to move, her face now stripped of emotion. Just for a heartbeat, she glanced up, her gaze snaring his. Their eyes locked, and Pastor Ayula felt the room spin around a single, terrifying certainty. A voice, barely formed, brushed through his mind. If you bless this union, blood will be on your hands." He recoiled, a tremor running through him. Was it divine warning? Was it paranoia? He did not know, but he could feel, down to the marrow, that something unnatural hovered on the edge of this wedding, something clamoring to be revealed. Yet still, the ritual inched forward. Tradition demanded it. Hope demanded it. The hope of 100 families silently leaning in, trusting that love would banish whatever darkness lingered. As Adiz glided near the altar, every footstep seemed to echo in Ayula's heart, compounding his dread. Despite his outward composure, sweat slicked his palm as he turned and quietly called to Brother MBA. "Please, fetch Mama Obi, for me from the first row." His voice was grave, coated with urgency. MBA's eyes widened, but he complied, weaving discreetly through the congregation. Still smiling for the crowd, Ayula took a deliberate step forward. He kept his eyes locked on Adiz, now mere inches from the altar. At that precise moment, the music fell away, replaced by an all-encompassing hush. The hush wasn't one of awe or reverence, but heavy, as if every heart in the building stopped in tandem. He opened his Bible, preparing to begin the ceremony, but his mind refused to move beyond Adiz's trembling hands, the unnatural chill in the room, and the silent warning that pulsed in his soul. "Shall we begin?" he asked, forcing steadiness into his tone. "Yes, sir," Checker replied, with unfiltered joy. "Yes, Pastor," echoed Adiz, her voice as silky and sweet as the surface of cherry wine. Yet Ayula saw what others could not. Her hands, by her sides now, quivered ever so slightly. Nerves? He doubted it. Ayula's next words stuck to his throat. He closed his Bible slowly, the sound of its cover snapping shut, rolling through the stillness. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone gentle but filled with unyielding command. "I need to speak with the bride and groom alone, just for a moment." A swell of gasps burst from pews. Checker looked baffled, turning to his bride, then back to the pastor. "Sir?" he asked, confusion audible in his tone. "Just a moment," Ayula insisted, his calm voice now threaded with steel. The tension in the air ratcheted up. Whispers surged like a tide. Adiz met his gaze, her own eyes shadowed with something unreadable. "Pastor, is something wrong?" she asked. He gifted her a smooth, practiced smile. "Just a word, in private." When she pressed, demanding, "Now?" he nodded. "Yes, right now." After a pause that seemed to last an eternity, Checker nodded his assent. Adiz's agreement was slower, but finally, she too yielded, stepping from the altar with her fiancé at her side. Escorted behind the pulpit as the church buzzed with uncertainty, half standing, phones capturing every confused moment. Inside the small, stark counseling room behind the altar, Ayula closed the heavy wooden door and turned to face the bride and groom. He did not offer them seats, nor did he open his Bible. Instead, he stood tall, his presence filling the space with subtle authority. "My children," he began, his words weighty and careful. "Before we carry on with these vows, I need you to answer one question, truthfully." Checker, ever eager, bobbed his head. "Of course, Pastor, anything." Ayula turned to Adiz, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "My daughter, is there anything at all, that you feel you should reveal before I join you in holy matrimony? Anything that weighs upon your spirit?" Adiz's response was calm, composed. "I don't understand, sir," she answered, eyes unwavering. But Ayula pressed gently. "I believe you do. Please. This is for the sanctity of the altar." She broke her gaze, looking momentarily at a crack in the floor. Then, meeting his eyes again, "With all due respect, this is meant to be the happiest day of my life. There's nothing I'm hiding, sir. Nothing at all." Ayula stepped closer, softening his tone. "Then why are your hands trembling?" The accusation was gentle, but it cut deep. Her hands fell to her sides. "I'm just nervous," she replied, the answer too thin, too practiced. Ayula nodded, holding her gaze. "All right." Then, holding out his Bible, he asked, "Please, place your right hand on the Bible." For a split second, hesitation flickered in her eyes. Then, slowly, she obeyed. Placing his hand firmly over hers, Pastor Ayula began to pray softly, his voice barely above a whisper, his words laced with intent. "Father, in the name of Jesus, if there is darkness hiding in this heart, let it be exposed. If there is evil in this plan, let it scatter. If there be secrets buried in her spirit, let the truth come forth. Amen." As soon as he finished, Adiz jerked her hand away, stepping backward. Her voice now quavered, colored by raw nerves. "I don't think this is necessary, Pastor." Her manner was no longer the grace of a bride, but the tension of someone caught at the edge. Checker, alarmed, reached for her. "Ada, are you okay?" Adiz swallowed, eyes darting away. "I'm fine. I don't like this drama. I have nothing to hide." The room fell into thick silence. Only the distant hum of confusion from the main sanctuary filtering in. The battle lines, invisible but real, had finally been drawn. Subscribe and hit like. Our powerful stories add years to your life. Join our Story Lovers Club and let us know in the comments. Where are you listening from? For a moment, a thick, almost palpable silence descended upon the room. Pastor Ayula could feel the invisible weight of expectation, both his own and that of the generations that had come before him, pressing down on his shoulders, demanding integrity and courage. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, drawing strength from the memory of all those countless weddings he had officiated. At each one, the air had been heavy with anticipation, yes, but never before had it been troubled by such a profound foreboding. He opened his eyes. The couple stood before him, Checker's hand now lightly covering Adiz's, in a gesture that, under other circumstances, would have seemed loving, but now bore an undercurrent of tension, as if shielding her from an enemy. Ayula observed the lines in Checker's brow, the subtle tremor in Adiz's breath. He softened his voice to a low, almost paternal tone. "My children, a wedding is not just the binding of two hearts. It is the joining of two destinies, two families, two spirits before God and the ancestors. You both are upright in the eyes of this community, but today I am moved by something beyond tradition or protocol. I sense a spirit of unrest in this room, a shadow that cannot be ignored. Adiz's gaze flickered to the window, her jaw tightening. She seemed to be holding her breath as if waiting for a verdict. Checker's grip on her hand tightened, and he turned his pleading eyes to the pastor. "Daddy, please," he said quietly. "We are ready. We have waited, prayed, and dreamed for this day. If there is something you need to say it now." Ayoola nodded, unswayed. He looked directly at Adiz, seeing past the veil and pearls, straight into the core of the young woman before him. "Adiz, I need you to trust me. We are surrounded by witnesses, but if you wish to speak in total privacy, I can send Checker from the room for a moment. I want you to be free of fear or shame. Is there something, anything, buried within you, beyond nervousness, that might affect this union if not spoken now?" For a split second, Adiz's composure wavered. She drew in a slow, ragged breath, and her eyes glimmered with something ancient. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "Pastor," she whispered, her voice stripped of its poise. "I am frightened, yes, but not of marrying Checker, not of this day. I am frightened of losing the chance to start again. My past is my past. My present is here. Please, let me have this future." There it was, a confession framed in hope rather than deceit, but still a confession. Ayoola sensed the complexity there, the unspoken grief nestled beneath her plea. He knew if there was darkness, it was twisted with longing for light. A silence hung between them for a few more heartbeats, the gravity of the moment circling the small, clouded windowed room. Back in the main sanctuary, restless murmurs grew into an impatient buzz. Several guests, confused by the delay, glanced anxiously at their watches, whispering conjectures. Chief Obobi, Checker's father, shifted uncomfortably at the front pew, his pride mingling with mounting concern. Mama Obi, sensing the unease, clutched a piece of her embroidered shawl and whispered prayers beneath her breath, silently urging the spirits to protect her son and his beloved on this most critical of days. A low ripple of tension began to spread, propagating itself across families and friends alike. One of the groomsmen leaned over to the best man, muttering, "This no be normal again, my brother. Wedding day happen for there." The best man only shook his head, uneasy. In the narrow passage behind the altar, the conversation continued. Pastor Ayoola silently pondered Adiz's words, measuring them as a jeweler considers a rare, flawed gem, delicate, precious, but not quite pure. He wanted to believe her, wanted desperately to open the sanctuary doors and pronounce blessings over two radiant souls embarking on life together. But another voice, less forgiving, hummed at the back of his mind. It said, "To protect one, you must protect all." He chose his next words with painstaking care. If you are carrying burdens, Adiz, and we all do in some way, sometimes it is not shameful to share them. Sometimes sharing is freedom's first step. This altar is not a stage. It is a crossroads between what was and what will be. No mask will last beyond these vows. Are you at peace, truly? A strained pause. Checker squeezed her hand, his own voice now anxious. "Ada, if something is wrong, let us talk." Adiz turned to him, eyes glassy but steady. "I want this with my whole heart. I want you. I am not holding secrets that will harm us. I have nothing in my heart but hope, Checker." Ayula watched them for several long moments before finally nodding. The unseen tension receded, if only slightly. In the quiet, he could hear his own heartbeat thudding, could smell the mingled perfume and sweat of worry. "All right," he said in a low voice that carried the finality of fate. "If you are certain, both of you, then let us proceed. But I will ask God once more to bless what must be blessed and to expose what must be revealed." As he spoke, resolve returned to his spirit, and a strange peace settled, heavy but restful, upon the room. They returned to the altar. As the doors swung open, the collective breath of the congregation was released. The music, tentative at first, resumed, this time a gentle flow rather than the triumphant crescendo of before, as if the very spirit of the church had quieted in intimacy to witness the truth of this union. Pastor Ayula stood taller, a shepherd stepping into the storm and choosing, by faith, to command the weather. He cleared his throat. "Brothers and sisters, thank you for your patience." His voice, elevated by the memory of ancestral priests and the authority of one who has stared darkness in the eye, rang out. There are times to rush and times to wait for God's voice. Let us proceed trusting that all is as it should be. The vows commenced, the familiar rhythm of promises, the exchange of rings, the gentle trembling of voices as two lives prepared to unify before heaven and earth. Checker recited his vows with earnest devotion, his words quivering only with the magnitude of the moment. Adiz, radiant, but now visibly more vulnerable, followed, whispering her promises with a flicker of trembling courage. Each phrase wove together threads of longing, faith, and fragile determination. Each word sealed hope against shadow. As Ayula prepared to pronounce the final blessing, his mind traced the journey they had taken, through uncertainty, suspicion, fear, and the brink of revelation. He realized that real faith is not the absence of darkness, but the courage to persist, to love even as the shadow looms. With a last searching look at Adiz, who met his gaze wide-eyed but defiant, he raised his hands over them. May this union be protected. May secrets find transformation. May this love outgrow all haunting. What God has joined together, let no man or spirit put asunder. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. A storm of applause erupted, a river of joy sweeping through the sanctuary, washing away even the memory of unease. The choir burst back to life, the crowd whooped, and a throng of eager hands swept the new couple off to celebration, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But in reality, nothing would ever be the same. Not for Adiz, not for Checker, not for Pastor Ayula. in the afterglow of the ceremony, as laughter and celebration began to fill the air outside the church, Pastor Ayula retreated into the shadows of the vestry. He dropped to his knees, not in exhaustion, but in grateful supplication. There, cloaked in the golden afternoon light, slanting through stained glass, he recited silent prayers for mercy and protection. He prayed for Checker. That naivety would yield to wisdom. That love would heal even wounds that time could not explain. He prayed for Adis, for peace to nestle in her heart, and for whatever shrouds of sorrow or remnants of darkness remained to dissolve in the sacred fire of communion and community. He even prayed for himself, asking for discernment, humility, and the grace to withstand whatever ripples might come as a consequence of this day. Outside, the festivities were in full swing. Guests laughed and danced, children darted between clusters of adults, and the music from the hired band lifted tired hearts higher still. Mama Obi, her anxieties finally soothed, fussed over trays of jollof rice and spicy chicken, ensuring no guest was left without abundance. Chief OBOLI, pride billowing in his chest, boasted of his new daughter-in-law, her beauty, and the great future awaiting their family. Within this swirl of celebration, Checker and Adis moved like the axis on which the world turned. She rested her hand in his, smiling as friends toasted, as old aunties ululated their blessings, as elders patted her back, whispering wisdom and hope into her ear. Adis laughed, a sound that, for the first time that day, seemed effortless, even genuine. Yet for those who looked closely, the glimmer in her eyes still carried the faintest shadow of longing. A secret kept, not from malice, but from the desperate desire to begin anew. As dusk settled, painting the village in hues of gold and rose, the newlyweds slipped away from the revelry. They walked side by side toward the edge of humans, their laughter and footsteps threading through the hush of early evening. For a while, their conversation sparkled with the innocence of promise. Plans for their new home, dreams of future children, playful debates about whose mother's cooking would dominate Sunday dinners. But as the sun dipped beneath the hills, quiet filled the space between them. Checker, emboldened by love and a lingering uncertainty, finally asked, "Adis, back there, with Pastor Ayula, was there something I should know? Something you couldn't say in front of everyone?" Adis's smile faltered, just a fraction. She paused, gazing out over the undulating fields that bordered the town. For a long moment, all that surrounded them was the hush of twilight, the gentle chirr of insects, the faint glow of lights back at the party. She took a deep, steadying breath. "My love," she began, her voice soft but decided. "We each come to this life with baggage, some suitcases heavier than others. My past is not perfect, but I have chosen you, and I have chosen this future. That is the truth I can give you now." Checker nodded, searching her face not for perfection, but for sincerity. He drew her into his arms, feeling the pulse of her hopes and fears. "Then that is all I need," he whispered. We will make our future ourselves, together, day by day, no matter how heavy the past or thick the shadows. In the fading light, they sealed the promise, not with grand declarations, but with a quiet, enduring embrace, an oath whispered not just to each other, but to the very soul of the village, and to whatever spirits watched. In the gentle, forgiving dark. As night descended fully upon Umans, a gentle cool breeze swept through the little town, brushing away the last traces of the day's heat. The stars overhead danced in the velvet dark, winking down on homes whose windows glowed with laughter. Inside the walls of Chief Obobi's compound, the festivities raged on long after dusk. Lanterns strung up on wires bobbed in the wind, casting shifting patterns on proud faces. Old men swapped stories around cracked mugs of palm wine, and young children giggled, darting under tables and chasing stray hens. The center of all this joy still was Adis and Checker. They sat together on a small bench beneath the largest guava tree in the yard, hands entwined, fresh garlands of flowers circling their necks. Family after family approached them, bearing gifts wrapped in fabric and heartfelt wishes for a marriage blessed by ancestors and protected by God. Even the sternest of aunties seemed to soften at the sight of Adis, offering, "May your home bear fruit, and your spirit remain sweet." Checker's father clapped his son's back with pride, while his mother, eyes misted with grateful tears, squeezed Adis's shoulders affectionately. Yet as the evening deepened and the crowd's laughter melded with the rhythmic beat of drums, a subtle unease lingered on the fringes. A few guests, recalling the odd interruption during the wedding ceremony, shook their heads in quiet conversation. "That pastor, eh?" one elder mused, leaning close to another. "He does not trouble himself with things without reason. I wonder what his spirit saw today." Another nodded gravely. "Whatever it was, let us hope it remains buried and never rises again." Still, Adis laughed and smiled, participating fully in the celebration. She accepted every congratulatory no with grace, and she whispered private thanks to those most dear to her. Her happiness, though real, seemed touched with relief, a gratitude that the ordeal of suspicion was past, and that the promise of forgiveness was possible. In the padded warmth beneath the guava tree, she closed her eyes, wishing for a future so bright that her past could finally become yesterday's shadow rather than tomorrow's ghost. Pastor Ayula, meanwhile, had lingered at the edge of the compound, keeping a pastoral watch over the proceedings, a shepherd never far from his flock. He exchanged words with Mama Obi, reassuring her that courage and sincerity had triumphed, even as he sensed there was more to learn from the day. He did not speak of spirits or shadows. Instead, he spoke of redemption, of the sacredness of second chances, and of how love, at its core, is always a leap into the unknown. Hours slipped by, marked only by the flow of music, the refill of drinks, and the reshuffling of chairs. Eventually, the crowd began to thin as older guests bid farewell, offering final blessings and wistful advice. The night became quieter, and the family compound seemed to breathe a collective sigh of peace. In the hush, Adiz and Checher retreated to a small room set aside for them, its floor painted freshly, its bed covered in crisp white linen, its air perfumed with the scent of jasmine and hopes. There, amid the soft glow of a single lantern, the noise of the party finally faded to a distant hum. They sat side by side, shoulders brushing, letting the silence sink into their bones. This was the first true privacy they'd had since the morning. The moment to look each other in the eye without audience, without expectation, just two souls bound by promise. Checker turned to her, searching her face. "Are you tired?" he asked gently. She smiled, her expression soft. "A little, but mostly I am relieved. Today my heart learned many things about fear and grace." He nodded, understanding. "And about trust. You know, when Pastor Ayula stopped the ceremony, I was frightened. Not for what you might say, but for what I might lose. I thought perhaps, just for a second, that the future we wanted would be snatched away." Adiz lowered her gaze, threading her fingers through his. "For me, the fear was different. I worried that my past would bar my entry into a life I want to build. I worried that mercy would not find me here. But you fought for me with words and with silence alike." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "Whatever storms come, Ada, we face them together, light or shadow. No secret, no spirit, no suspicion will turn me away from what I see in you." She nodded, tears shimmering in her lashes. The intimacy deepened, not in physical closeness, but in spiritual communion. Two hearts avowing that safety is found not in perfection, but in honest promise. Meanwhile, Pastor Ayula, his robe exchanged for a simple shirt, walked home under the starlit sky, his thoughts swirling. Each step crunched on gravel. Each breath tasted the bittersweet air. He recalled the words exchanged in the counseling room, that delicate dance between fear and hope, between suspicion and mercy. He pondered the role he had played, the line he had walked between duty and empathy. Did I do enough? He wondered. Did I risk too much or too little? The tension of the day lingered, but so did the assurance that sometimes a leader's courage must be matched with restraint. For all his searching and questioning, what he had found was not darkness. It was the human complexity of longing to be loved in spite of flaws. He reached his modest home, lit only by a single bulb, and sat at his desk with his well-worn Bible open before him. He traced the lines with a tired finger, reading the words about forgiveness and the new covenant. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us. The scripture danced across his conscience. Ayula prayed, not for clarity now, but for humility. He prayed that his flock would grow in honesty and in self-acceptance, that his own heart would never harden against those who sought light in the midst of their struggle. He prayed that God would teach him to recognize the difference between danger and vulnerability, that he would always be brave enough to ask the difficult questions, but wise enough to listen when silence was the deeper answer. Before sleep took him, Ayula made a vow to himself. He would be vigilant, but never unyielding. He would lead by example, welcome. Market women bustled, restocking stalls with bread and okra. The sting of the previous day's suspicion, muted by celebration, seemed to have faded like an old bruise. At Chief Obobi's house, Adiz and Checher rose early, moving together in a gentle dance of partnership. They prepared breakfast, sharing tasks, laughing softly at their small mistakes. The routines they forged already began to lay the foundation for their future. The way they negotiated space in the kitchen, the way they waited for one another before tasting the first spoonful, the way they exchanged glances filled with silent communication. As they ate, they spoke frankly. The honesty carried over from the previous night, strengthened by sleep and the cleansing spirit of dawn. They made plans, not just for their marriage, but for how they would handle adversity, misunderstanding, and even suspicion from those who struggled to let go of the past. They agreed on loyalty, on openness, on nurturing forgiveness. By midday, neighbors arrived with gifts. Yam, fabric dyed in indigo, live chickens for a feast. Some came seeking advice, others came simply to wish them luck. The couple received them gladly, sharing the lessons they had learned about trust and patience. Even the children, previously wary, now played near their feet, sensing that whatever tension the wedding had carried was resolved. Mama Obi, her spirits lifted, watched her son and new daughter with pride. She saw not just their happiness, but the quiet resilience that would see them through seasons, both bountiful and lean. Lessons bloom. Days passed, and the memory of the wedding faded into local legend. The story of Pastor Ayula's bold intervention was told and retold in compounds and market squares, each time embroidered with new details. How the pastor had seen through the veil, how the bride had met his challenge with composed dignity, how the groom had stood firm. For some, the tale was kosher, proof that leaders should always seek the truth. For others, it was an anthem of second chances, of choosing mercy even in the face of doubt. In the small church by the hillside, Ayula continued his work, ministering to families, guiding troubled souls gently toward redemption. His reputation grew, not merely as a guardian against evil, but as a wise man who understood the difference between suspicion and true danger, between righteous judgment and unwarranted fear. Adiz and Checher, now securely married, built their new life, one meal, one evening walk, one hardship at a time. Their home remained welcoming, with a door always open to those seeking advice or sanctuary. Their love strengthened, not because it was free of ghosts, but because it learned to dance with them, to transform sorrow into strength, secrets into shared wisdom. In time, Adiz found complete peace, not just from her past, but because of the acceptance she had received. The town of Umans, having passed through a narrow gate of suspicion and fear, grew in understanding, embracing the lesson that love flourishes best where stakes are high and forgiveness is abundant. The ending of their story was not an exorcism, not a banishment of all doubt, but a weaving together of light and darkness, proof whispered old Mama Obi, that every true love endures precisely because it refuses to be silenced by suspicion, but persists in courage and honesty. With time, Adiz became not only a wife, but a figure of inspiration for many in Umans. Women, both young and old, began to seek her counsel. She listened kindly, never rushing to give advice, but always sharing the simple truth that wounds, imagined or real, do not bar one from being worthy of love. Many confided their own secrets to her, hidden regrets, lost loves, fears about the future. And in listening, Adiz discovered the pull of a new purpose and a quiet power. Some nights, she sat with Mama Ubi on the wide porch, watching fireflies flicker in the garden, while they spoke of forgiveness and the unpredictable nature of happiness. Checker, too, found his role growing. With his father's encouragement, he began to take on responsibilities in the family's affairs. Through his actions and his loyal devotion to Adiz, he became a figure known not only as Chief Obobi's son, but as a man of his own making, one whose goodness was the product of hard-won faith, not blind tradition. Lessons bloom. The villagers, in observing this couple who had faced trial so publicly, began to unravel their own biases, little by little. The younger generation grew emboldened to speak openly about their desires and worries, drawing courage from how Adiz and Checker weathered suspicion together rather than apart. Some even started to see Pastor Ayula's intervention as a blessing in disguise. After all, the ordeal had forced hidden truths into the light, creating space for genuine love to grow. Pastor Ayula, for his part, felt a new sense of accomplishment and humility. He saw how his difficult questions, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes feared, had ultimately fostered a stronger sense of unity and grace within the community. In private, he wrote new sermons about the cost and necessity of forgiveness, about trust as a daily practice, about how spiritual leadership was less about being infallible and more about being utterly honest when the world needed it most. One evening, a year after the fateful wedding, Umans prepared for a harvest festival, a time when the town, awash in the colors of ripened fruit and fresh grains, celebrated both plenty and endurance. There was something different in the atmosphere. Lanterns brighter, voices louder, spirits more unburdened. It was a festival not just of foods and music, but of grateful relief. The hardest times had been met and overcome. At the center of the celebration, Adiz and Checker stood side by side, not just as hosts, but as examples of what it meant to survive together. Adiz wore a dress she had sewn herself, patterned in bold indigo and white, the fabric telling a story of resilience. Checker, grinning, introduced performers and directed children in their recitals. Their relationship, once tested by doubt and public scrutiny, now gleamed with a resilience that drew admiration and envy in equal measure. During the evening, as drums echoed into the hills and villagers danced, Pastor Ayula was invited to offer a blessing. He stepped into the large, open circle formed by farmers, market women, children, visiting relatives, and elders. There was no altar here, no stained glass windows, only bare feet, dust, and the steady beat of joy. He raised his hands, his voice ringing out above the music. A year ago, we were tried. We were forced to ask what it means to believe, not just in God or tradition, but in one another. Tonight, I see before me not only a thriving harvest, but a community that has learned to bind up what has been broken, to forgive what cannot be changed, and to walk bravely into tomorrow. Let us remember, suspicion is easy. Courage is the true work of love. The crowd cheered, many moved to tears. The blessing was not for crops alone, but for understanding, for patience, for the open-heartedness that made all things possible. In that moment, every person felt both seen and whole, a rare magic born only of hard-won peace. As night wore on and the festival wore down, Adiz and Checker wandered into a quieter area beneath a sprawling mahogany tree. There, shielded from the noise and excitement, they could finally breathe in the fullness of what they had built. Softly, they reminisced about the tension of their wedding day, the fear of revelation, the steadfastness that had seen them through. It's strange, Adiz mused as she leaned against her husband. I once thought the worst thing that could happen was to have my secrets discovered. Now I see that the true danger would have been never finding the courage to hope for forgiveness. Not from others, but from myself most of all. Checker smiled. You always had more courage than you gave yourself credit for. Do you ever wish things had been easier? He shook his head. No, Ada, because easy things don't teach us anything. If Pastor Ayula hadn't challenged us, if you hadn't been brave, we would never have discovered just how strong trust could be. We learned together that love is proven not by lack of trials, but by how we handle them. Their conversation floated into the night like an unspoken promise to remain true even when the road ahead was uncertain. Above them, the stars shimmered, reminding them that even after the darkest storms, there was always light left to guide them home. Weeks melted into months, and the story of Adel's and Checker's union became more than a tale of past suspicion. It became a lesson strung between generations. Children grew up hearing about the wedding where the pastor waited for the truth, the bride who faced her fears, and the groom who loved fiercely through them all. Teachers and elders alike wove the lessons into songs and proverbs, embedding them into the fabric of community wisdom. Lessons bloom. For Adiz, the healing was gradual and self-affirming. She invested herself, heart and soul, into her new life, cultivating not only a garden and a home, but also relationships based on trust and fresh beginnings. Sometimes she still visited the old guava tree where she and Checker had first sat as newlyweds, remembering the thin line between despair and hope she had once walked. Lessons bloom. There she nurtured memories not as burdens, but as reminders that survival and happiness are often scrappy, imperfect, and built on a foundation of persistence. Checker ever steadfast, flourished as a leader, shaping the next generation not through authority alone, but through the example of humility and openness. When neighbors asked his counsel on delicate family matters or sought his help resolving conflict, he drew on his experiences, on the patience demanded by suspicion, on the grace that followed public reconciliation. Those who once doubted him now admired the strength his journey had kindled. Even the elders agreed that the wedding, with all its challenges, had brought the community closer together. Suspicion had not destroyed them. It had, oddly enough, cleansed and unified. A sense of collective responsibility and compassion now infused daily life as never before. One bright afternoon, as the scent of citrus blossoms drifted on a gentle wind, Pastor Ayula visited Adis and Checker once more. He sat with them on the porch as children played nearby and discussed all that had changed, not just for them, but for all of Umans. Sometimes, he reflected, a crisis is not a curse, but an invitation, a call to grow and to see one another clearly, past fear and into faith. Adis smiled, feeling a depth of gratitude for all that his guidance had made possible. You taught us, not by demanding answers, but by asking honest questions. You showed us every time a secret is met with grace rather than condemnation, another stone is rolled aside from someone's heart. With that he stood, blessed their home once again, and walked back to his church, satisfied that his calling was not to judge or to shield people from hardship, but to strengthen them for it. In the years that followed, the story of Adis and Checker was no longer told as a caution, but as a celebration of resilience. Their family grew, laughter and forgiveness filling every hallway. The memory of that tense wedding day faded, replaced by new legends of unity, endurance, and hope. And through it all, Umans was changed, a town richer in compassion, clearer in purpose, and more deeply committed to the simple but powerful miracle of loving one another, shadows and all.